The 1976 to 1979 Ferrari 400 automatic. The 70s were a slightly troubling time in automotive history. There were some indisputably great cars to come out of the decade, but there were a lot of other big bloated barges being made, and quite a few other questionable decisions. One of these controversial decisions was made by Ferrari, and it was to make a car with an automatic transmission. This accompanied the decision to build the 400 at all in the first place, something a lot of people still consider to have been a mistake on Ferrari's part. So this is obviously a somewhat controversial car made all the more controversial. The 400A, as it was called in automatic form, debuted in 1976, the same year as the 512BB and the year after the 308. It was nowhere near as popular as the 308 would prove to be, but the 400A did quite well. And, even if the purists did moan about the automatic transmission, the 400A outsold the manual-equipped version of the car by more than 2 to 1, and the same still held true when the 400 became the 400i in 1979. It does make sense though, as the ability to afford a Ferrari is not the same as the ability to drive one. Continue reading to learn more about the Ferrari 400 automatic. Exterior. The 400 was essentially just an updated version of the 365 GT4 2+2, most of the updated details were mechanical though, and the changes to the bodywork were minimal. Much of the styling was inspired by the Daytona, although obviously made bigger to turn it into a 2+2. This included very angular bodywork and oh-so-70s pop-up headlights. There is also a character line running down the sides of the bodywork, dividing the top and bottom half of the car, another Daytona feature. It was noticeably longer and taller than anything else in the Ferrari stable at the time, even the other 2+2, the 308 GT4. It was a period when the styling on all of Ferrari's products was really pretty similar, even the mid-engine Berlinetta boxers. Exterior dimensions. Interior. Ferrari was on a roll with 2+2s at this point in its history, and even if it had never been a company that aspired to comfortable interiors, it had the formula worked out by this point. The design of Ferrari's V12 2+2s was pretty well established with the 365 GT 2+2 of the previous decade, and the 400's interior was basically just an update of this. The seats were bigger and more comfortable than ever, and the look is about as tasteful as anything could be in the 70s. It can seat 4 comfortably, better than in early 2+2s and better than the Ferrari V8 2+2s like the hideous disaster that was the Mondial. I'm not going to try to tell you that the 400 was a car without any flaws, but the interior wasn't one of them. Drivetrain. At launch, the engine used 6 2-barrel Weber carburetors and produced 340 horsepower. Ferrari was already starting to stray from its traditional system at this point, but the 400 still has an old-fashioned Ferrari name. That means the 400 in the name comes from the V12 engine's unitary displacement, in other words, 400 cc displacement per cylinder. Some quick math should tell you that means it has a 4.8-liter version of the Colombo V12, up from the 4.4-liter version in the 365. At launch, the engine used 6 2-barrel Weber carburetors and produced 340 horsepower. In 1979, the 400 was updated and renamed the 400i, with the big difference between the two being that the 400i had fuel injection. These early fuel injection systems weren't great, and power dropped down to 310 horsepower. Ferrari enlarged the engine to 4.9 liters and changed the name again 1985. This 412 was still essentially the same car though, and power was back up to nearly where it had been, at 335 horsepower.
If you liked this video, please share your thoughts in the comments below and don't forget to hit the subscribe button.